The Monster in the Twilight. By Jorg. Chapter 5. Loyalty. Apple Bloom. Where are you headed? The call of the young farmer echoed across the whole of the farm, causing the young filly to whom it was addressed to stop, turn around on the road, and huff in exasperation. Just over to a friend's house to do homework, she called back. I'll be back by supper. You better do that. Big Mac and I are gonna be working the south field until late. Got quite a crop setting on blossoms, and we wanna make sure there ain't no bugs in 'em. You be careful now, and stay away from the Everfree. Some ponies reported seeing the monster in there just last week, and I don't want ya anywhere near it, ya hear? I hear ya, sis. The little filly trotted away down the road, continuing only until she was out of sight of her sister, before doubling back along a thinly trod path. Sweet apple acres actually butted up against the Everfree forest along the Zap apple tree line, but this early in the season they were still skeletally bare and somewhat creepy. As she approached the forest, she began to dart from bush to bush, finally slipping up to a familiar evergreen bush and tunneling underneath the soft branches into the dark interior. Monster? Are you in here? It had been over a week since Apple Bloom had seen Monster, about the time the Royal Guard came through Ponyville on one of their periodic searches of the Everfree. No pony ever said it out loud, but dozens of strangely armored Pegasi and unicorns led by a princess was a disturbing sight, even if they were supposedly just looking for dangerous monsters in the Everfree. Apple Bloom knew better. Whatever monsters were in the dark forest seemed more afraid of ponies than ponies were afraid of them. Even the hydras in the swamp fled in terror when they spotted anything with hooves. She was afraid she knew who the Royal Guard were really hunting, Monster. The little filly's encounter with the frightened creature started last fall when she had fallen asleep on top of a perfectly good pile of leaves and lost her backpack. The next day when she returned to the tree to search for it, she found it sitting on top of the pile, all neat and clean with the homework inside completed and the apple fritter she had been saving for later gone. To a little filly, this was a dream come true. All she had to do was leave homework under the tree and the next day it was all done, perfectly, with all of the problems worked out in excruciating detail. It did not last. After a week, Apple Bloom had picked up her homework, finding it undone with a little notation in the margin labeled "Too easy." The homework monster needs fed, she had declared, bringing back not only her homework the next day, but 2 books from the school library. She had been rewarded by a completed homework page and a small note. More please? Nothing dangerous would ever say please, and if it was really dangerous, it would spell better, she thought, checking out 2 more books from the library. Eventually, by the time winter was nearly over, she had nearly exhausted the small school library and had resorted to checking out books at the town library. Miss Dewey was always nice as could be about it, but Apple Bloom felt a little nervous about lugging books around with titles like Pre-Classical Unicorns and Their Accomplishments or 70 Simple Spells for Simpletons, ***. With less than a year to go before retirement, Miss Dewey could not care less about what books Anna Pony checked out of the library. Apple Bloom's routine had been simple: drop off the book bag with uncompleted homework and a book after school, head out to go crusading with her friends, and the next morning, pick up the completed homework and the bag now filled with yesterday's books on the way to school. The ease of the procedure made her sloppy, and Miss Chirilli had suddenly gotten suspicious when she turned in the answer to what is the sum of the numbers 1 through 6 as s equals n/2, a plus t, equals 6 halves, 1 plus 6, equals 3, 7, equals 21. Because there was not enough time to recopy her homework and add a few mistakes in the morning before school, even the simple logic of young students determined she needed to change her routine to pick up the completed homework in the evening, when it was still fresh. So that evening, with a bag full of apple fritters, Apple Bloom placed her homework and book bag in the customary spot before vanishing into a nearby large bush to observe. She had every intention of inviting Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle, if only Scoots could stay quiet and Sweetie Belle could survive the scrubbing which would follow returning home covered in twigs. If her homework monster observation project had worked, She had plans of setting up a real concealed blind with observation peepholes and camouflage netting, and possibly a muzzle for Scootaloo. The first hour passed without any observations of homework monsters of any type. She passed the time scribbling plans for a blind and nibbling on fritters. The second hour passed much the same, but it was getting late, and she was strangely out of fritters despite being quite certain she had packed enough. Apple Bloom decided to pick up her bag and head home, but when she did, there was a noise. It was only a small noise that could have been easily overlooked by anybody but a small nervous filly in a rapidly darkening wood. It sounded a little like a whine, as if a small puppy were begging at the table, but grew in strength when Apple Bloom began to carry the book bag away. On a whim, she turned around and returned, listening to the whine grow softer, like a game of hot and cold. The growing darkness only amplified her terror when she finally realized the whining noise was coming from the very bush she had been hiding in. 5 minutes later, she was at home, upstairs, and under the covers. The next day cheerily was relieved that her initial suspicions of cheating were unfounded. The homework Apple Bloom turned in was so bad, it could have been copied off of Scootaloo, superscript 1. It was. It took 3 more days before Apple Bloom worked up the nerve to return to the homework spot, this time poking the bush with a long stick before setting out her monster bait and settling into the bush to wait. She had brought a book to read and a couple fritters to nibble on, but was too nervous to do either. Instead, she simply shivered in the cold, trying to listen for every rustle and creak in the very rustly and creaky forest. At first when the book she was holding twitched, she paid it no attention. The shivers from the snow and nerves made it feel like a boulder in her hooves anyway. It could have just been a twitch. Then came the very quiet and terrified-sounding voice. Boog. She almost ran again, except the voice sounded even more afraid than she was. Ever so slowly, she placed the book on the dirt, and pushed it in the direction of the voice. Monster, she whispered. Would you like the book? With a purple blur, the book zipped into the darkness and the sounds of fleeing hooves vanished into the dark forest. When she finally got up the nerve to look, she found the book monster had brought back sitting in the slightly warm depression under her bush where the creature must have been sitting, watching her every move since she had arrived. Over the next few months, Apple Bloom spent every hour she could find sequestered away in the bush, slowly gaining the trust of Monster. Her friends in the Cutie Mark Crusaders complained that she spent so much time studying they did not have enough time for any good Cutie Mark gaining activities. It hurt to lie to them, but ever since she had discovered Monster, she knew the frightened creature needed the companionship she could provide more than anything else in the world. A faint rustling in the bushes made her heart skip a beat. After such a long absence, Monster was always skittish and twitchy. It took long minutes before the tip of her slightly glowing horn poked out of the darkness under the bush. She always had a glow about the battered protuberance, even if it was firefly-like and just at the needle-sharp tip. Although a nearly uniform brilliant white, the large horn as a whole had a somewhat mottled appearance, as if chips and needle-like splinters of it had been fractured away and regrown over the course of years of abuse. The top of her head slowly emerged next, with both tattered ears flicking and twitching in different directions, or occasionally freezing up at the smallest sound. What hair she had left on her scarred coat was snow-white near the horn, gaining the slightest tinges of purple in a color gradient that grew in darkness the further it went across her patchy coat, continuing down to nearly completely purple at the muzzle and neck. The eyes still bothered Apple Bloom. They were dark to the point of nearly being completely black from the shadows she preferred to hide inside, with only the smallest purple ring around their outside edge. Neither eye tracked together, and they never seemed to be looking directly at Apple Bloom, but somehow she knew every single motion she made was being tracked and analyzed in the likely event Monster thought she needed to flee. It's okay, whispered Apple Bloom. You're safe here. Ever so slowly the rest of the unicorn emerged into the dim light under the bush. Large patches of dark colors across her coat appeared at first glance to be mud or some forest plants rubbed into her flank in dirty smears of ochre, vermilion, and brown, but on closer examination they were actually areas where her coat had been burned completely away, but grown back in patches of ugly scar tissue. Almost lost behind the scars on her flank was the tattered remains of a cutie mark, vaguely resembling one glaring red star like a blotch of blood surrounded by 5 small white stars. What little remained of her tail was but a stub with a few loose hairs clinging to it, grown much longer than her patchy mane. From the top of her head all the way down her neck, what parts of her mane remained were neatly shorn down nearly flush with her coat. It was this basic grooming that first made Apple Bloom eerily aware of a fact she did not like to think about. Monster had another friend. The creature crawled flat against the ground up to the little filly, and nosed her saddlebag gently with a small, hopeful grunt. Her dark nose twitched, and a faint line of drool leaked out from between her jaws. "Eritter," she grunted with one eye looking up in the general direction of Apple Bloom and the other locked onto the saddlebag. "What do we say?" Apple Bloom asked gently, removing her saddlebags and reaching inside. "Ow!" The short stub of a tail beat vigorously against the forest litter and her rear end waved back and forth. "The word is not now. The word is please." Apple Bloom frowned slightly at the adult-sized pony looming over her while she pulled out the warm apple fritter. "You can say it. You're not an animal." "Hey The stub of a tail quit thumping against the ground and the big purple eyes grew mournful. Too. Now. Animals don't read." Apple Bloom pulled a book out of her bag and squinted at the big words in the title as if that would make them easier to pronounce. "Canterlot, Equestria's crown jewel of culture. I think that means they've got a lot of gems there. But if you're just an animal, I guess I'll have to take it back to the library." The short, stubby tail thumped against the ground once, as the creature tried again to use big purple eyes on Apple Bloom, which would have worked better if she had been able to use them both at the same time on the same target. Then the tail thumped again and again and again. "The book or the fritter?" Apple Bloom grinned when the creature's tail thumped repeatedly against the ground. "Boff!" The little filly grinned when Monster grabbed the offered fritter, then paused. Instead of jamming the whole thing into her mouth, Monster took the most cautious, delicate, definitely non-animal bite. The warm, sugary goodness of apple family cooking overwhelmed what little control the scarred unicorn had, and the rest of the fritter vanished in 3 more quick bites. A purple aura surrounded the book and gently tugged, unable to make it move because of a small yellow hoof still holding it to the ground. "You know the rule." Monster tugged gently again before sighing and pulling another book out of the shadows. "Ray-I-Hade. Trade. Right. I can't afford to buy you nearly as many books as you read, I'm just a little filly." Monster just grunted in response, swapping books by almost dropping the old book at Apple Bloom's hooves and clutching the new book to her chest with a deep, appreciative sniff. "Books," declared Monster gleefully. "Books, books, books." Apple Bloom giggled at the grinning unicorn. "I'm glad you're happy. I've got story problems for homework today." "Books fust," said Monster firmly, sitting the book down on the ground and settling in beside Apple Bloom. "Books." She stared at the little filly, who remained sitting quietly and not moving until Monster suddenly blurted out, "Anks. Ank-o-o-o-u-u-u. You're welcome." "All right, I'll read with you first." The little filly settled down next to the unicorn and nodded. "Go ahead." A delicate violet aura surrounded the front cover of the book and opened it up to a beautiful print of the city of Canterlot, spread out in all its tower-covered and waterfall-strewn glory. "Canterlot," read Apple Bloom carefully. "The capital of Equestria and the hub of the civilized world. In these majestic towers live the cream of equestrian society, dedicated to what's wrong." The unicorn had frozen in fear, looking at the book as if it were a venomous snake. Superscript 2. 2. Not entirely true. A snake of any variety would have been vaporized by this point. "Don't be afraid," whispered Apple Bloom, gently touching her on the shoulder. "It's just a book. I'll close it for." One scarred purple hoof darted out and stopped the filly before she could even touch the cover. The unicorn's breath was coming in short pants and both eyes were locked onto a particular image in the book. Slowly, she moved her hoof over to the book and poked the picture, as if she expected the image to become real under her touch. Her body was tense as a board and the hoof gently trembled while she traced the horn and wings of a large white alicorn caught in flight over the city. "That's Princess Celestia," whispered Apple Bloom. "Do you know her?" "Hurt." The word from monster was almost perfectly clear, without a hint of her speech impediment but laced throughout with unbearable pain. "Kill." There was a slight sound of rustling leaves outside of their hiding place.